True crime for your page. Victim advocacy. Ryan Modell gunned down. His father, Sandy, tells his gripping story here on William Steele True Crime with my host, Samantha Markle. Hear the story of likely political corruption in Florida. Why is this case not being prosecuted? Is it a case of stand your ground? We think not. Join William Steele True Crime and our guest, Sandy Modell. Welcome to another episode of William Steele True Crime Channel podcast. Thank you for my fans of A&E's Inmate to Roommate for joining me. We're going to cut right to the chase here. We're going to do one of the most important shows I feel I've ever done since being released from incarceration and opening this True Crime Channel. We have many inspirational stories, transform lives. We've put out there that we're willing to have crime victims on here also to tell their stories, the unsolved homicides, cases where maybe the investigations are not being done. Maybe the investigators want to come on and speak to us and tell their side of why things aren't getting done. So we have a case that's just fell into, by the grace of God, I believe, fell into my lap, and the victim's father is with us today, and he's trusted me to tell this story, and I hope I do him good in telling this. And would also ask this audience: his son was murdered point blank, and he's not, and the murderer is not being charged, the alleged murderer. So let me be safe. But the facts point to this being a case of premeditated first-degree murder. And unfortunately, a Florida prosecutor and the governor are refusing to see it that way. The governor is afraid to get involved, and he's supposed to be tough on crime, yet this guy's still wandering the streets after already killing one person at least. So back with us tonight, I have my co-host, Samantha Markle. Samantha's joining us, and we also have Ryan. Ryan's the murder victim, but we have his father, Sandy Modell, here with us today to tell a story about how his son, while sitting on the grass in a bathing suit, was stalked by a guy who was told to stay in the house after a minor incident, and the police were on the way. Why this guy hunted for him in a condominium complex in Lee County, Florida, and murdered him. And, again, maybe for safety, I probably need to see allegedly, but because he's not charged yet. But we know what happened. And let me introduce Samantha and Sandy. Thank you. Back to the show. And so let me see. Let's start with you, Sandy. So your son was Ryan. Give my audience the overview of what happened. You explained it very well. And I've read your book. You were nice enough to send everybody a free copy of the book you just wrote about the case, which is Murder and Corruption in Florida, with Ron DeSantis looking perplexed on the cover, not knowing what to do about this case because they want the votes of the NRA. From your perspective, from your horrible experience, what happened? Tell us who you are first, and then we'll go into the case.
All right. Well, first, thank you, Bill and Samantha, for having me on. I appreciate the support, and that it's nice to have good people backing your play on what should be a fairly simple issue. Either you're a politician in favor of murder or you're not. Let's start with the victim. It's my son, Ryan. Just before we get caught up in facts and details and legal issues, it's worth noting he was a person. He was my son. Great kid. He was smart. He was funny. He was kind. He helped other people. He would never met a stranger. So a great kid, lively, active. The year before this happened in 2016. The year before this, I lost my wife very suddenly. And it motivated my son to go back to school and take a 6-month program on pacemakers and heart devices so that he could maybe prevent some other family from going through what we had been through. So that was the kind of kid he was. He lived in Fort Myers. And long and short of it was this was a Saturday night. On Friday, he had just got a new job. He'd finished school and was now had been offered a position. He was coming back to Orlando, back home. And he was going to run the calibration for 3 medical clinics. Found out on Friday, he and some friends were celebrating that and a birthday on Saturday. Monday, he had to be back in Orlando with HR to get processed in for his new job. He had a great future in front of him. They stayed out a little bit late, and he went home. The buildings look the same. They're somewhat monolithic. They're not marked well. He went to the wrong building. The correct unit, one building over. He'd had too much to drink. No argument. Knocked on a door around 1:32 in the morning and woke people up. And he probably should have been ashamed of himself for that. And maybe that's disturbing the peace. I don't know. But instead, the owner is a bit of a hothead, or the resident, the owner, bit of a hothead, came down. Supposedly there was an argument, and he slammed the door on Ryan's foot. And if we assume what he's saying is true, and there's really no reason to believe it, then he was still within his rights. He slammed the door. My son had made a mistake, woke him up. The guy slammed the door. Ryan left. They were on the phone with the police, he and his wife. They told the police, it's just a drunk kid. Ryan was 32, the police were turning 33.
If I can interject at this part of the story, from reading the book, your son's apartment, his unit number in the condominium complex was 102, and this guy's was 102, but in a different building that looked identical.
Correct.
And your son was only wearing a swim trunks at the time.
He was on his way back from the pool. They'd been in the pool having a couple of cocktails. He was on his way home. He had had enough. So there's allegedly an altercation of some sort. Guy slams the door on my son's foot. They're on the phone telling the police, look, it's just a kid that's drunk. It's not a break-in. It's nothing along that line. And the police say, well, stay in your house and behind a locked door. Stay there. We'll be there in a couple moments. Instead, under oath later, because we posed the murderer, I'll call him a murderer because the police say it's murder. That's good enough for me. Under oath, he later said, both he and his wife said, one of them said he was back in the house for at least 2 minutes behind a locked door. The other one said 4 minutes before he decided he would just get his gun and go back outside. I don't know what he was going to do. The police were on their way.
Right. And the police suggested that they stay in
So
and wait.
I'm sorry, Samantha.
Well, so clearly I guess what was puzzling to me is at that point, there is no imminent danger. Stand your ground laws don't seem to apply because, first of all, the resident, Mr. Taylor, was armed. They were behind a locked door. And based on what I read, Mr. Taylor then wanted to find out where Ryan was. He didn't know where he was, so he cracked the door. So clearly there was no forced entry. There was no, threat for safety or bodily harm. That being said, my question was, why would he then take a Glock 10 millimeter and go outside and look for him? I mean, I can see, I can see being armed because you're walking outside and you don't know what's outside and you just want to be armed anyway. But they had already expressed that, it's just a drunk kid. He came to the wrong apartment. So the pursuit of him seems to establish intent. It seems to establish paranoia and some dysfunctional thinking that suggests some aggression, that suggests some psychological issues. I mean, that whole thing just really bothered me. I've never heard of anybody from the initial phone call seemingly not feeling threatened, being calm, and then all of a sudden there's this deviation and there's a weird spin where he felt like he needed to be armed and take a gun outside and look for Ryan. Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird.
Well, first of all, he liked his gun. The gun was a 10 millimeter. It was specially equipped after the aftermarket with both a flashlight and a laser. And he was known, according to the police, to walk around his neighborhood in the middle of the afternoon, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just a normal neighborhood. He was known to walk around with the gun and the extra size magazines, but he was known to walk around with 5 or 6 of those in his pocket. So he had, 60 rounds of ammunition as he's just walking in the neighborhood. I don't know what he was expecting, but he did that on a regular basis, according to the police. To answer your question, though, the police had the same question. Why did you leave your apartment? And he said, to protect my wife. And they said, inside behind a locked door with a gun, with the police on your way. But instead went outside and left the door open and now we're gone. How is that protecting her? And they never got an answer.
Right.
What he did,
Well,
from that point, he went back outside. He was behind a locked door, went back outside, and that's re-engagement. Secondly, he went and tried to find my son. That's pursuit.
So,
And number three, when he found him,
provocation.
he provoked him. Stand your ground does not allow any of those three elements, re-engagement, pursuit, or provocation. Any of those things eliminate stand your ground. Collectively, they make it ridiculous.
So at the moment he encounters your son, he's about 100 yards away from where the front door of this condo was.
Right. In somebody else's yard.
In somebody else's yard, your son is sitting with his back to him on the grass in his swimsuit. What happens next? And then we'll get on to the legal issues.
What happens next is, now that he's found him, he points the gun at him. And in Florida, it's my understanding that pointing a gun at someone that's not a threat is felony assault.
That's right.
exactly.
Points the gun at him and starts yelling at him. My son stands up, turns around and stands up to see who it is. And as he takes a step forward towards him, now the murderer is afraid. He fears. Stand your ground says you can't cause the item that you fear. Otherwise, I could go and slap someone on the back several times. When they turn around angry, then I have to take action. I'm afraid. You can't cause the problem.
Right.
And I think, Sandy, it's also noteworthy that if I'm correct, is that when he went out, he found Ryan allegedly had his back turned to him. Again, clearly not a threat, no aggressive body language, not standing up. And so then at that point, after that, then what happened? Then he stood up and
turned around and started walking towards him, the guy that's yelling at him. At that point, criminal defense attorneys say, if there was any stand your ground anywhere, it actually inured to Ryan. Ryan was the one being threatened. He was unarmed. He was minding his own business. He was in a neighbor's yard. This guy ignored the police instructions to stay inside, went outside, grabbed his gun, found Ryan, and started yelling at him. And as Ryan stood up and turned towards him, then he was afraid. And that's when he took action. And that's when he murdered my son.
Didn't he admit that he put the flashlight and the laser right in your son's eyes?
The quote was, I hit him right in the face. Now, he knew already that Ryan was intoxicated. That means you're hypersensitive. Consequently, being hit in the face with a flashlight or a laser or both would be very antagonizing.
Right.
There was no reason for any of this. He didn't need to leave his house. He didn't need to go and point a gun at anyone. He didn't need to create a problem. And then he murdered someone just because he was a fool. Just a hot hit with impulse control.
We're going to get into his background here in a second. I do want to say this, Samantha, excuse me. So he then shoots and kills your son and has been harassing you ever since because you want to see justice done. Now, for my audience, Samantha Markle is a relatively new co-host on the show, and we're very glad to have her back because she had other things she was involved with. But I'd like you to tell the audience and Mr. Modell here a little bit about your background, your degrees, and what your specialties are. So you're actually speaking from a lot of experience, and you're a Florida resident.
Well, I have a master's degree in mental health counseling, but my undergrad degree was in criminology and psychology. So I was fascinated by profiling. I was fascinated by social crime, by individual crime. And, although we have to take it always on a case-by-case basis, I've always been fascinated by how some can deviate, how, some can just by virtue of mental illness, by virtue of a whole host of things, go so far astray as to commit not only crime, but these heinous crimes, mala and se crimes, and, homicide. I mean, so this case in particular really grabbed my heart for several reasons. I was looking at this individual as if I were profiling him. I was looking at his background. I was looking at his Facebook page. I was looking at the text messages that he sent you, Sandy, that were incredibly disturbing and violent. And all things taken together, what I was getting, I was thinking perhaps that there were some comorbid things going on. But more than anything, I was seeing fantasies, illusions of grandeur, antisocial behavior, lack of empathy, remorse, and shame. And whether it was his apparent seemingly tracking of and gravitation towards single women on Facebook, even though he claimed to be so protective over his wife, I thought that was kind of contradictory, but clearly some fantasizing going on, some power, some aggression, some inferiority complex issues. When I looked at his text messages to you, and I couldn't help, I guess, but zoom in on the fact that he repeated, and I mean, according to the text messages, he said, you're not, something to the effect of, you're not going to get my wife. Well, first of all, you mentioned that when he went outside to look for Ryan, he left the door open. So the whole I'm protective over my wife thing didn't really fly with me.
I think the answer
if
to
he
that,
was so protective over, and if he was so focused on his wife per se, why was he scoping out other women on Facebook under an alias? So
well,
I think that
well,
that was kind of that was kind of a decoy. I think what he really was, what his whole MO, I think, was a power trip, was like seeing himself as some big, powerful macho man.
Because
Well, no,
this
because
guy is, in my opinion, and
right,
I've done,
right. I
he
mean,
is a violent bully, in my opinion, and a
yes,
piece. You know what? And I'm not as articulate as you guys, but I have a really hard for helping people, and I can see through somebody like him. And let's. I know when he does get arrested, I'm confident this case is going to be resolved with an arrest. That he's going to claim all those things. Oh, well, I wasn't in my right mind. I was drinking. I had my childhood. Poor me. But he was lucid enough to speak to his wife and the police, and to go out there and argue with a guy that he knew wasn't well. So he's a bully because he was
exactly. And so,
and he lawyered up afterwards.
Someone can be.
He was certainly had enough of his faculties to lawyer up afterwards. He didn't meet with the police for at least 2.5 weeks. It took them that long to come up with an explanation, and his explanations never made sense. The police said whenever we asked them things, it didn't make sense. Towards your question, Samantha, in the altercation, and this showed up in the text messages, my son must have said hello to the murderer's wife, or done something. Part of the problem is they'd had marital problems. His wife had an affair, at least one.
Yeah.
And as a result, he seemed to want to go and play big shot. Even though Ryan had left, he didn't like the fact that Ryan had said hello to his wife or something. And that's where you can't have my woman and all that stuff came from. So you're right on the money there. That is probably the motive for the murder, because he wasn't scared. He was safe, but he was angry and he was embarrassed. And that's a problem for him.
Well, it seems like that was the motive for the confrontation. It was like a chest puffing, like one man going after the other. In his mind, he needed to feel like he was large and in charge. But I got the feeling that what may have happened is that since it's a felony to point a firearm at someone in Florida, that he realized after he was pointing the gun at your son is that he's witnessing what I'm doing. There's a live witness to talk about this. I think he may have just panicked, shot him to remove the possibility of, being charged with that felony because he was in between a rock and a hard place. So
you may be right. But the police believe he went outside with his gun to go find and punish Ryan. They believe it's premeditated murder.
Right, premeditated first-degree murder because of all the issues we discussed.
Yes.
I will say, and I learned this from speaking to you and from your book, which is very well written. And again, I'm going to have the link to the book on the description. Please check out this book, however you get your hands on it, Murder and Corruption in Florida. It's my understanding that many prosecutors, many journalists many experts in stand your ground laws in Florida, there's certain things that have to be met. This meets none of the criteria for stand your ground.
Right.
He was locked in his house and safe. He decided to ignore the police, go out, locate your son 100 yards away while he's sitting on the grass, and then, as he stood up, murdered him. So
Yes.
this is not a stand your ground case. The prosecutor, her name escapes me at the second. I have it right here written down.
Amira Fox.
Amira Fox. I've
She's
got
an
it.
embarrassment. A corrupt embarrassment.
And the disgraceful thing is, look, I lean more Republican than anything else. Where's the tough on crime? Where's the she's allowing in my opinion, a murderer to wander the streets of West Palm Beach, where he relocated out of fear of his other neighbors who realized what he did. So this guy, in my opinion, is a coward. And in my opinion, Amira Fox, I've been no angel, but I am a crime victim advocate now, and I have never, ever seen this, especially coming from a Republican. You would think the Democrats would be all over her for saying, why are you not prosecuting this guy? Why is Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who during COVID didn't care if, nonviolent prisoners lived or died? This guy here, I just can't even believe he would even think to run for governor and want to lead. He has no compassion for people. He wants to posit himself like he's tough on crime. But where's the compassion for humanity for crime victims like yourself, like what happened to your son? DeSantis has the ability, and I learned some of this because I was a law clerk in prison, but I learned a lot of it from speaking to you, Sandy. He has the ability to move this case to another county. And
he has said so. He told me so in person 4 years ago.
What happened in that case?
He said when local government doesn't do their job, the governor has both the authority and the obligation to take action. He knows. He knows exactly. He knows what's going on. The problem is he's afraid of the NRA. And the woman down, the state attorney down there was supporting the NRA for a vote during her campaign. That's the reason she wanted to call this case Stand Your Ground. It's ridiculous, but that's what she's done. Now, you mentioned experts. I've had some of Florida's foremost experts on Stand Your Ground. Mark O'Mara, Ben Crump, former prosecutors, experienced journalists. Anybody that's ever looked at this case, former state attorney here in Orange County, anybody that's ever looked at the case has said, this is clearly a murder case. This is clearly murder. There's no question about it. And it's not a stand your ground. I don't have a problem with the Second Amendment. Don't have an issue with stand your ground. This just isn't it. It doesn't meet the requirements. And everyone I've met, every expert I've consulted with has said, not stand your ground. The only one that sees stand your ground is Amira Fox. And if you call her office and ask her to explain it, she refuses to do so. She is unwilling and or unable to do that. The governor has a petition to move this to another jurisdiction. All I've ever asked is put it somewhere. She has a bias against me. I supported her opponent in the election, and she's vengeful. So I've gone to the governor's office to just move it, not anything else. Just move the case to a new, independent, objective, honest judicial district. If you call his office after 4 years, and there's now a second petition that's been there almost a year and a half, but all his office will ever say is it's still under review, which is just embarrassingly lame.
That's really disappointing. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Sandy. I don't know. I don't know if you know. I mean, it's my understanding that not only is he tough on crime, but that he has a particular stance on not allowing prosecutors to be rogue and decide what statutes they will and won't enforce. In fact, I've heard of him sanctioning
Democratic prosecutors,
right?
Like Andrew Warren. Right. He has no problem with Amira Fox. She was the subject of a Pulitzer Prize when she tanked a grand jury murder case, and one of the grand jurors was so incensed, went to the press. They wrote the story. It was a Pulitzer Prize winner. So you've got a Republican that's walked away from murder cases at least 2 or 3 times, and that's okay with the governor. But Andrew Warren, a Democrat, issues an opinion, not even a case on his desk, and the governor doesn't try and just remove that case because it didn't exist. He removed him from office. That's a huge overreach. But Republicans can walk away from murder, and they seem to be exempt. So I'd like him to explain that. I'd like him to explain why he's had a petition on his desk for 4 years. That's so blatant. And there are only 2 ways this can go. And they should both support me. Move the case. And if the new judicial district says you see a crime, then everybody should be happy. A crime that went undetected has now been prosecuted. Or if the new judicial district says no crime, then the state attorney in Fort Myers should be pleased to be vindicated. There's no reason not to move the case and get a better look at it instead of a biased. If she was a judge in this case, the requirements for recusal from a judge, she wouldn't be allowed to touch this. And yet her standards are so far below that of a judge.
So all things considered, how do you feel, Sandy, about red flag laws? Because I also read that there were some early indicators that this guy was a problem. For example, flattening neighbors' tires, how aggressive because they parked too close, and that he walked around the neighborhood with an armed weapon. I would think that somebody in the neighborhood would have taken notice, that authorities should have maybe paid closer attention to him. And see, it's people like this that shouldn't be allowed to have firearms, because he was a ticking time bomb, seemingly.
To answer your question, some of these things came up after the fact. For instance, the police found out on interviewing that he walked around with a gun all day, but that's after he'd already murdered Ryan. So it's behavior like that should remove the gun so that he doesn't go and do it again, but it wouldn't have saved Ryan because they didn't know it beforehand. I have heard from neighbors. He moved from Fort Myers to the West Palm area. And it's interesting because I had a billboard up criticizing the state attorney during the election race. And he felt that maligned him. I just said murderer. I didn't use his name. And he filed suit claiming that the reason he had to move from Fort Myers to West Palm was because of that billboard. The problem is, I put the billboard up in 2018. He moved in 2016. He moved 2 years before that billboard ever went up.
Wow, I'm surprised to get him for perjury for swearing out that.
It's just some of this stuff is just unbelievable. But then he claimed, well, the ramifications were still affecting him. I said, well, then don't murder people, and you won't have those ramifications.
So you had investigators, the sheriff's department, a lieutenant. You had a body of law enforcement. Everybody consistently is saying this is homicide.
Yep.
And the only obstacle to that was the prosecutor.
And she's just mad because she doesn't like the fact that I campaigned against her and supported her opponent in the previous election.
Didn't she make a representation to you that you can prove that if you did not support her opponent, she would see that this was brought to a grand jury or something along those lines?
Yeah, it's in the book. She did it with her state attorney letterhead. So I filed criminal complaints with the Bar Association, the Ethics Commission, the Election Commission, and the FDLE. And FDLE looked hard at it, and then all of a sudden, as I was told, they stopped.
It's extortion all day long.
Yeah, well, the FDLE thought so, but then all of a sudden they stopped. And basically, their boss reports to the governor. So, we have a number of different commissions, and we have a number of different we have state attorneys and attorney generals and all that stuff. But the reality is, the only two people that have any impact here, state attorney in the 20th Judicial District and the governor, because all the people that should be investigating this, like FDLE, they report to the governor.
Right.
You go ahead and investigate your boss.
So if you wanted to move the venue or you wanted to take it to federal court, is this evaluation that's seemingly very biased and refusal to prosecute, is that a barrier to moving the venue? Is it clouding anything that you try and do? In other words, is that evaluation and refusal to prosecute, that decline, clouding you and clouding the case unjustly?
No.
So,
She knows, Amira Fox knows this is a murder. She knows that quite clearly. She's mad at me for the billboard because it was against her. And she's mad at me for some pamphlets that I had nothing to do with. She thinks I did, but I didn't. If I did, I would say so. So she's got issues with me. She knows this is a murder. She doesn't want it going somewhere else and having someone investigate it and conclude it's a murder and charge it. It'll make her look bad. It'll make her look like the vengeful witch that she is. So instead, she just sits on the case. The governor could move it. He doesn't want to antagonize a fellow Republican.
It's my understanding that other members of the NRA see this as a premeditated first-degree murder as well. So I don't know where she's getting an official position from them. Does she get something official from them that they also see it as stand your ground, even though he went 100 yards?
You're seeing things I'm unaware of, Bill. I didn't know the NRA had a position on this.
No, I was asking if there was an official position. I know other people.
I don't know if the NRA has any position, official or otherwise.
I know other people that are members of the NRA and have
okay.
since I met you, and they've all said it's premeditated. First,
No, I've heard that from people that happen to be members, not of management or administration of the NRA, but yeah, in terms of common sense, people look at this, it's a murder. It really is.
And common sense, regardless of party affiliation. You've got Republicans out there like me looking at this going, what's up with this? I mean, it does reflect poorly. So
I was told, Samantha, that part of the problem, the reason the governor wasn't responding was my first two attorneys, both Mark Amara and Ben Crump, are both Democrats. And I would have done better if I had a Republican attorney. And my response has always been, I didn't know there was one party that was in favor of murder and one party that was against. I thought that was one of those cross-party issues that we all agree murder is a bad thing, but I don't know. That's not the impression I've been given.
Yeah, I noticed that Mark O'Mara, who represented, he had a high-profile case. Was it the Zimmerman case?
Yes.
He had a high-profile case, and he's a very prominent attorney in Florida. And I noticed he wrote the foreword for your book, and I was really impressed.
Mark was my attorney. He wrote the petition to the first petition to the governor requesting the case be moved. Mark's considered one of the state's foremost authorities on stand your ground. He talked to the state attorney's office during the early months when they said, we're not sure what we're going to be able to do. And he said, well, put it in front of a grand jury. That's what people do when they're not sure. Exactly. They refuse to do that. They refuse to do that.
Right, but
they were just sitting on it. They asked me not to talk to the press. They said they were actively investigating. They sat on it for a year. Once things cooled down, then they just said, we're not prosecuting. It was an orchestrated bag job on their part.
That seems crazy to me without articulable grounds for that decision. And clearly stand your ground does not apply. The imminent danger and feeling like, you're protecting your own life or someone else was removed when the door was locked. Taylor chose to open the door and then go out and pursue your son. There, what
re-engagement, pursuit, provocation, all of it. Ask Amira Fox how this is stand your ground. Because if it's not stand your ground, it's murder. But if you try and reach Amira Fox and ask her to explain how this is stand your ground, she can't, and she won't even try. She just says, we didn't see a crime. Now, her underling, Dan Feinberg, Dan's an interesting guy, and I mentioned it in my book. Dan had been sanctioned for ethics and should have been fired. They kept him around, and consequently, Dan needed the job, and Dan would do anything he's told. Dan wrote the report on this, and his justification for stand your ground was because this guy was still within the curtilage of his property. And it's interesting because stand your ground, as I point out in the book, is a 5,000-word piece of law or legislation in Florida, and nowhere in those 5,000 words is the word curtilage. He picked the one word that wasn't anywhere in there to justify a decision that makes no sense.
So
I can see Ms. Fox even fallaciously saying that she didn't see culpability, and that would be far-fetched. But to say she didn't see a crime, my suggestion would be, God, go back to law school. I mean, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Up to 1 year, at least a year after the murder, he was still addressing groups because she was running for office. And whenever she was questioned about that, she said that was a robbery, and there was a Marine defending his family. And first of all, he was an Army guy. He'd been out 30 years. He was likely drunk because he does have alcohol problems. And the police had said from day one, there's no robbery here. She was spouting that robbery story at least a year later on the campaign trail.
If I was you, I would have sued her for disparaging your son, saying that he was some kind of robber when she knew he lived in apartment 102 and he was knocking on another building 102. She knew he wasn't an armed robber.
My efforts were not towards litigation. My efforts were all about, I believed in the early years that the problem was they just didn't see the legal aspect to it, or they didn't see the facts clearly, hired attorneys and tried to make it clear. Later on, I realized they're not stupid. They're just corrupt. Right. So then I stopped worrying about attorneys and started looking more towards publicity. And it was Ben Crump that suggested I write the book. He said, you need to tell the story.
I wonder, and I'm just speculating now, and it could be, I don't know how much you dug into either of their backgrounds or if that's even appropriate or allowed, but who knows? This guy Taylor might be a family member of hers, and she doesn't want to see him in jail for premeditated murder.
No, the investigation, he's from North Carolina. The investigation was pretty clear. She was not helping. He was the beneficiary of her generosity, but he was not someone she was connected to, related to. He didn't donate. He was just a murderer that gave her a chance to call a case, stand your ground, ingratiate herself with the NRA. That's all that was going on there.
Right. Even though it seems like they don't support this case as being that, and we're going to figure that out going back on. So I know you had some litigation. You did file a lawsuit of some sort against him, and you got Taylor under deposition, and he dug his hole even deeper. What happened there?
Well, to file a wrongful death suit, you have a 2-year limit. And as we got to the end of the 2 years, we had to file. I wasn't interested in filing a wrongful death. I wanted to see a criminal case, but we took the opportunity to use the civil case, the wrongful death, for depositions. And under oath, both the murderer and his wife admitted that he had been back in the house for between 2 and 4 minutes.
Right.
And we believe those are low estimates, but he'd been back in the house for several minutes behind a locked door when he decided to get his gun and go back outside. So that we got those depositions. And as a result, we went back to the police. They reinvestigated because this gave them a tighter timeline and made them even more certain that this was a murder case. And then they went back to the state attorney's office. And I believe they were quite surprised that she still wouldn't budge, that she still wouldn't file charges.
That's like
so Sandy, what can you do in a case like this when, in my opinion, from reading this, it seems a clear case also of prosecutorial misconduct. I know people don't like those words, but when you see a political motive and you see the rule of law being overlooked because of that, we have a problem. And so what do you do with that? Although they have prosecutorial immunity, still prosecutorial misconduct can't just be ignored. So how do you handle that then? At the governor's level, file a complaint, a suit on the side. I mean, how far can you run with that ball, and how can we as a society help to make sure that that isn't the norm, that politics don't come before people, especially when you're talking about homicide? Justice has to be done. And when you've got prosecutors ignoring the rule of law because of some political preference or favoritism, then we have to find a way to stop that.
I agree. The problem is there aren't a lot of avenues. There is the ballot box. I'm not a politician. I'm not an attorney, and I'm several hundred miles away from there. So I don't have the option to start backing candidates and waiting for a new election against an existing machine. The only real practical remedy is bring the facts, and they're egregious. It's beyond prosecutorial discretion. It is misconduct. Bring those facts to the governor. I've done that for 4 years. And for 4 years on 2 different petitions, a petition 4 years ago written by Mark O'Mara, a petition about 15 months ago written by Ben Crump, saying, here are the facts, just move the case. No response. You've got a governor that's going nationwide talking about being tough on crime, and he sees a murder being ignored by one of his fellow Republicans, and he stays silent. I've never received an acknowledgement they have the petition, never a phone call, never a text, never an email, nothing.
Yeah, I would ask my audience, please go to the petition on change.org. It's at the top of the page here, and also it's in the description. Click on that. It's a 1-page appeal. We're trying to get this case moved. We're trying to compel DeSantis to really take a look at it and just move the case. Move it somewhere else. Allow a grand jury to look at the facts of the matter in an unbiased location and make a decision on whether to charge or not. And that's what we would like you to do. And like I said, I don't think I've ever had a more important discussion on this channel than this. This is a very, very serious matter. And the book is available there too as well. So what else would you like to say about this? What else would you like done? What else can we do to help? Is there anything we can do? We'll certainly do it.
It's the publicity that you're generating right now. The truth is that we have, as Samantha pointed out, we have a rule of law. We're a nation of laws, and we have some things that we consider to be unacceptable. One of which is murder. Murder is the worst crime one of the worst you can commit, certainly. And when that happens, we expect the government and the structure that exists to protect us. So there's a murderer that because of whatever problems and whatever issues he has, goes out of his apartment to teach someone a lesson, ends up murdering them. That person shouldn't be walking free. And yet you've got a politician and a state attorney in Fort Myers that found it was better to use that case to her advantage with the NRA than to actually do her job. And she's made it an open secret that what she wants to do next is run for attorney general. That corrupt woman could end up being, if we don't stop her, the number one, law enforcement person in the state of Florida.
She's going to stop herself by not acting on this case. Listen, I saw in your book, and you described some of the horrendous emails that Mr. Taylor, the alleged murderer in this case, has sent you, just taunting you, harassing you, disrespectful, profanity.
Yep.
One, do I have your permission to put that on the screen here when we get this ready to release this? And two, do you want to share some of these comments? And to give this guy was not some poor veteran who was terrified in his house and, guys with guns were barging in. There's something wrong with this guy. Let's go to his state of mind and the type of messages he's sending you after your.
Before you pull those up, I will tell you, he moved from Fort Myers. We had an investigator do door-to-door work in that complex, and they said the guy was just a nightmare. He would walk around the neighborhood. They knew he was armed. He would be out in his yard fighting with his wife. She'd be yelling, "Stop doing so much in the way of drugs." I think he does a lot of marijuana. By his own admission, he's an alcoholic. He has sent me those text messages. So he was a nightmare for the neighbors. He left. Neighbors cheered. But then, he became somebody else's problem. He has neighbors in West Palm. I don't know who these people are. They've called me unsolicited. It's easy to find me. I'm not hiding. My address and phone number are easy to find. They have called me. They've contacted me, and they've told me of the nightmares he has caused them living in the neighborhood. That's where the story came about flattening the tires of somebody that he felt was parked too close to his lawn. He's gotten into heated debates with in their recreational area because there's some rules that he's ignored, and when people mention to him, he blows up and threatens them. He's a nightmare. They hate him. It's interesting. I have as you know, a Justice for Ryan website up as part of my Facebook page, and I get about 150 views on that per week. So on an annual basis, it's probably between 7,000 and 8,000 people. And I figured that's how many people every year hate this guy's guts. But his neighbors, they hate him. He's a nightmare to live with. He has run for their board. When he was board of directors in the HOA, he had all kinds of plans. When he got voted down, he was threatening people. He's had altercations at a dog park. He's just wherever he goes, there's a problem. And the common element in every interaction is him.
Yeah, it seems like he's clearly got anger management, conflict resolution skill problems. But some counselors will say that a lot of that anger and aggression arises out as a primitive response to fear. And when you look at his life and his low conflict resolution skills, his messages to you seems like an overcompensation for his own guilt. He doesn't seem to have empathy, remorse, or shame, but clearly he's in denial. And I think what he fears most is being caught, is having to really be accountable and deal with what he's done, because although he might not feel guilty, I think he knows that legalities are looming. And so his anger at you is like an overcompensation, and he's trying to villainize you in his mind so he can ignore what he's done.
So I try to make it difficult for him to ignore it. One of the things I point out to him in response to some of his nasty texts is that there's no statute of limitations on murder.
Right.
I saw a text where he tried to provoke you to come to his house in West Palm Beach and put the address in there. So I don't know if that's an accurate address, but one of them has the actual address. That's his.
It is.
Unbelievable. This guy's
It's an interesting statement. The address has an interesting statement. This is a man that claims to have feared for his life, so he had to go outside and murder someone. But apparently in West Palm Beach, he's proud to say he sleeps with his doors unlocked. I'm confused.
Pretty high crime in some of those areas.
What's that?
Pretty high crime in some of those areas. I've lived in that area. So
I mean,
you have affluent areas, but you have high crime as well.
He
Well,
seems
what I'm saying is there's a contradiction between claiming I was behind a locked door with a gun and scared, so I had to go outside, and then sending me a text that says, "Come on down. I sleep with my doors open." I don't know. One of
It
those
all-
things, there's a lie in there somewhere. I just don't know which one.
He's
it
trying to.
also seems that the confrontation and the fact that your wife saw him triggered his inferiority complex, and what in his mind he needed to do was to, like, take control of the situation. He needed to feel like the bigger man. And your son was good looking. I'm sure that probably worked on his psyche, and he probably felt threatened by that alone, because he's not young and handsome anymore. So whatever, it seems like a lot manifested out of that insecurity. But for him to fly off the handle and take a Glock out and pursue your son after they had already admitted that he's just, he's a drunk kid coming into the wrong door. Like, for that to then exponentially manifest and change into something that enraged him and that he felt threatened by is really psychotic. It's very weird.
Well, I would tend to agree from a lay perspective. You said my wife. I think you meant his wife.
His wife. Sorry about that. Yeah. So Ryan had seen his wife, and he mentioned that. He mentioned that in the text message. But again, what's odd about that is
I think that was a pretty clear, established motive,
right,
for the rest of his behavior. He was embarrassed, and he wanted to go show off. And his wife had, let's face it, he'd gotten older. I don't know what kind of other issues he's had, and his wife was she had affairs, or at least one that she owned up to. So this was an issue for them. And neighbors saw them fighting quite a bit in Fort Myers. Neighbors have seen her bleeding, coming out of the house with a bloody nose in Palm Beach, in the West Palm area.
I was going to say that in reality and quietly, she's probably scared to death of this guy. Doesn't know how to extract herself from him. And I would think her life is in danger because she was behind closed doors with him and knows what really happened.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you something else. When they both testified under oath, she was remarkably cooperative. She wasn't being quiet and confusing. She was very cooperative. Well, I wasn't there. I refused to be in the same room with the murderer. But she was, so I wasn't there. But my understanding was that she was extremely cooperative. And I think it's very clear she'd like to see him charged with murder and hauled off. That would solve her problem. He's been an alcoholic. He can't hold a job. Financially, he's been a nightmare. The legal defenses on both the original investigation, he had to hire a criminal attorney. On the civil case, he had to hire a civil attorney. Both of those things cost a lot of money and drained them. And so she's stuck with a guy that's an absolute nightmare, a drunk, or an alcoholic, I should say, and someone that's she's working every day to support him. That's been going on for years.
Sandy, after the investigation, all things taken together, right? Everybody knows this is a homicide, and regardless of what the state's attorney's office did with that, when you consider red flag laws, when you consider that this man clearly has psychological issues, in my opinion, clearly in the opinion of others, why is he still armed? Is he still able to walk the neighborhood with a firearm? Has ATF or have local law enforcement come in and confiscated his firearms? Because they know that there are issues and he has anger issues. So what's going on with that?
There are people in West Palm Beach that should be concerned. Anytime you cross paths with someone like this, he's armed, he's volatile, he works as a real estate agent. So you could actually be walking through a house with him having no knowledge that he's a murderer and likely armed. No way of knowing.
And I think somebody doesn't just have to be under psychiatric care or convicted of a felony not to have a gun. I think if they're a known drug user, they can be banned from having a gun, I believe. So even under that, premise, why can't they strip them of the guns so at least nobody else is dead?
I don't know. If I lived in Palm Beach County, I would want somebody to do something about this guy, because it's no longer theoretical. He has done this before, and I believe, because he's gotten away with it, I think in time he will murder again. I think he liked it. I think it gave him power, and he sees himself as a victim. He's got all kinds of weird perspectives on this.
Doesn't Doesn't the Association of Realtors have a code of ethics? Aren't they concerned that they've got a man walking around the neighborhood in neighbors' houses, selling homes, showing homes, taking buyers and sellers around, and that there are clearly established anger management issues, that there are problems? Like, I mean, I don't see how he is allowed with the Association of Realtors to be able to continue.
That's what we're here for.
Last fall, he threatened to come up to my neighborhood because he's a realtor. He could canvass in my neighborhood, 200 miles away from his.
And you're being threatened. And if you have physical evidence of those threats,
Samantha, I filed a complaint with the Palm Beach County Board of Realtors. And they let it go. They didn't care.
You're kidding me. Wow. That's incredibly unethical, threatening people in the community. Wow.
Well, you would think they'd be upset because he was using his realtor license to do that. No, they were fine with it.
Let's try to see if we can wrap this up and get this out as quick as possible. And I want you to say anything else that's on your mind, both of you, Samantha as well as Sandy, especially. Anything else on your mind? Anything else you want to say? I want my viewers to please hit like and subscribe. We're trying to support victims here. And I've told you guys I'm going to be doing inspirational stories. I'm going to be doing stories of hope, and we're going to be profiling crime victims. And we have one right here. It couldn't be any more clear cut. Please sign the petition. If anybody out there knows Amir Fox or Governor DeSantis, Ron DeSantis, just about everybody I know, is Republican. My attorney is representing and friends with Donald Trump. So this is like you said, you articulated better than I can, perhaps, that crosses party lines. Murder is murder is murder. And my opinion is this is first-degree murder. So please sign this petition. If you guys have anything else you want to say, and then I have like 2 quick questions for you, Sandy, before we wrap up.
Well, what I'd like to say in closing is, number one, thank you both for having me on and for being so knowledgeable on the case as well as the general issues involved. That's valuable. That really is. And it's my only solution is to raise the governor's attention. And I can only do that with publicity and signatures from good people like you, people that say, look, this is murder. We shouldn't have this. We should take action. And if enough people sign the petition, or if enough people let the governor know we're opposed to murder, you should be protecting us, then I believe at some point he'll be forced to respond and take the appropriate action. And when that happens, it'll be people like you that are responsible for having made it happen. So thank you.
Well, and Sandy, maybe legislatively, not just at the judicial level. Maybe there's a way legislatively that when something like this comes over a governor's desk, that there's like not a statutory window, but that they're required ethically and according to a regulation to respond within a certain amount of time. Because, a parent grieving the loss of a child when there's an unjust murder shouldn't be left hanging and wondering, like, why haven't I gotten a response? That would be ignored.
You raise a good point. You make a good point. But I would remind you that the legislature has a supermajority both in the Senate and the state house that's Republican. There are my Democratic senator, my senator is a Democrat, state senator. She says DeSantis won't even return her calls. If she has a constituency issue, they don't even get a call. So the Republicans are pretty much, they control the legislature and DeSantis controls them. So you're not.
As a Republican, I'm really offended by the way this was handled, because we are a party of public safety. We are a party of the rule of law. And so to hear that this has been so sloppily handled to the extent of, in my opinion, being ignored is really disappointing and disheartening. And I think Governor DeSantis needs to move on this, because we are all watching. This is not just about, this is not just about a few prosecutors. This is about all of us as a community, Republican or Democrat. But I'm a Republican. I don't like this. And so I think this needs a lot of attention. I think we need to move on.
Enough people, Samantha, that'll change his position. Bill, you had questions?
Yeah, I just want to say that, Governor DeSantis, look, this is a serious situation. You're actually starting to lose votes in the support of Republicans the more people that hear about this case.
Right.
You can easily resolve it. My understanding is you have the authority to just simply move it to another county.
That's
if
it.
Fox doesn't want to move, let a grand jury in another county, hear the evidence, have the hearing that's required to decide if it's truly stand your ground. but you can't hunt somebody.
Stand your ground is not something a prosecutor awards you. We've discussed this, Bill.
Exactly.
Stand your ground is something you go to court and petition for, file a motion for, and the judge can say, I'll allow you to try to use that defense or not. But it doesn't mean you get a hall pass based on this. You know, that if every prosecutor did what she did, every time there's a murder, someone would stick up his hand, yell, stand your ground, and they just walk free.
So when you decide to go forward,
No, the law is obvious. If this was her son, if this was, you know, a son of Ron DeSantis, this would not be taking so long like this.
I think we all understand there'd be a different approach.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So if you decide to file the mandamus or the federal lawsuit against Amira Fox or the governor's office, we stand behind you. We'll help you get publicity. Before I forget, I want to give a shout out to your public relations firm. My understanding, they're helping you, and they're helping you. You know, my understanding, I don't know if I could say this, probably not a big deal, pro bono, because they so much believe in this case. Fred Yeager, public relations.
Yes.
Connie and Bruce Socha is a pretty famous actor. Bruce Socha said, do me a favor, speak to my friend Connie. She has a client who needs help getting some publicity on the son's murder. So I give a shout out to Bruce Socha. He's got a heart of gold. He's a very famous celebrity. He didn't have to get involved with this. He turned me on to Connie. Connie and I have been talking. Samantha, you know, everybody knows who Samantha is. She's a wonderful being, and she's got the credentials to be here and have an intelligent conversation about this.
Obviously, and I'm grateful.
I implore her to get involved and come on board with us. Okay, so I do have a couple of quick questions. I was wondering if you could say, now we know what you're saying to Ron DeSantis, and I'd like everybody to sign the change.org petition. So we know what you would say to him. What would you say to Mr. Taylor if you look right in the camera right now and tell? Because I don't know that he can turn himself in for a murder that he's not charged with.
I've suggested it,
but and not to laugh this off. But
I've suggested it to him. What would I say to him?
Yes.
You know what you've done. You're a murderer. If you're a man, stand up, accept your own what you've done and accept the appropriate punishment. But I think he's a worthless piece of garbage, and I don't think he's going to do that. And it's the governor's responsibility to make sure that we're protected from people like that. And until this guy stops walking free, that's at least one that I know DeSantis has on the street that he could have fixed. And I don't know what he's going to say to the next parent that loses a child or a brother or a husband. I don't know. He's going to say the next family, this is a guy I could have put away. I was more interested in playing politics. I didn't do it. That blood's on his hands as well as Amira Fox. That's going to happen. But we shouldn't have to wait for that. They should protect us now. And that's what this is all about. And that's why you're helping so bad.
We're all watching. I mean, ignoring this not only does a disservice to you, to Ryan, to your wife, but it does a disservice to the community because it does away with the concepts of general and specific deterrence, which is what, we hope that law enforcement and the law stand for and what they do. And so if you ignore this, it sends the social message of, gee, anybody can do this. And if you're a Republican, you can get away with it. No, we need to stop doing that.
Bill Bratton was the police commissioner in New York. Broken windows. Do you guys remember the broken windows campaign?
Yes, the first sign of a neighborhood in decline when you see unrepaired broken windows.
Right.
Well, the bottom line is, if you see murder going on, the next time you've got a problem and it's not being addressed, the next time you've got a problem, you realize murder, it's open season, so it's not a problem.
Exactly.
Like what's going on in New York, Democrat prosecutor is arresting Trump today. They indicted Trump for crimes that are way past the statute of limitation. He has no authority or jurisdiction to do so. It's just to get headlines, and it's disgusting everybody plays politics. It's
fairly obscene, but they're letting criminal actions with victims go on today. So I don't understand the logic to it, and I don't understand what Amira Fox is doing because I don't know how she lives with herself. I don't know how you can take an oath of office, decline to prosecute murders because it's in your personal best interest, and I don't know how you live with that. And I don't know how the governor does it. I don't know how they live with themselves. But hopefully enough pressure from good people like you will force them to change their positions.
Okay, now this might be emotional, and I just want to ask you this question. If it's too difficult to answer, just say so. We'll move on, and we'll say good night. So now your wife passed away, and her name was Donna, right? She passed away about a year before your son was killed.
14 months, if you're counting, and I count.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. And our heart breaks for you. And then your son learned to work on pacemakers because he wanted to help people that were in presumably your wife's situation. So
Correct.
he was a good guy. He was trying to make a difference in society. He wasn't out there doing anything wrong. What if you could say something to you? You know, I believe your wife and son are looking down, you know, your efforts all these years, and it might be hard for you to answer the question because it's hard for me to pose it without getting a little choked up. What would you say to Donna and Ryan right now? Can you tell me what you would say to them about your efforts?
Well, I say I've worked very, very hard for 7 years, but I haven't made progress. And I expect to see them again someday. And when I do, I expect they'll ask just that question. What did you do about this? And my life is dedicated to the idea that I need to be able to provide an answer. And so I've worked on this for 7 years. I've been asked in an interview by a reporter, you know, when I did something, we filed some junction, and she said, if this doesn't work, are you done? And I said, I'll never be done. As long as there's breath in my body, I will be pursuing this piece of garbage, and I will be looking for the justice that the system should have provided, but hasn't. So there will be no time I ever stop until he's until he's finally in prison.
All right.
Because I do want to have a better answer someday, Bill. I'm not proud of the answer I've got now. I've worked very hard, but I've been up against a rough system. It's been a tough 7 years. I spent 35 years building a family and lost 2 out of 3 in 14 months. It's a tough path to travel. And then the government said, we don't care about the fact that your son was murdered. That's just not acceptable. That won't stand. So it's been an unpleasant 7 years, maybe another 7, maybe another 27. My father passed away 2 months ago at 100. So I'm going to be around for a while. And as long as I'm around, I will be pursuing this case with every asset at my means at my disposal. Every opportunity I have, I will be taking action. And eventually, this case will get moved. The murderer will be indicted or charged. He'll be convicted. He'll be imprisoned. And that's when I get to stop. Until then, there's no stopping.
What I find interesting, a lot of Republicans that I've shared this with are completely disgusted with Amira Fox and DeSantis for not moving on this particular case.
Well,
I know
hopefully they'll be loud about it.
You're an accomplished guy. Look, I see a lot of degrees behind you. You're a college professor. You're very articulate. Your book was beautiful, well written. Thank you so much for coming on. Samantha, do you have anything else you'd like to say or add?
No, I just want to say, Sandy, thank you. As a community, we are behind you, and hopefully together we can bring some closure for you and bring justice. Thank you for sharing this. My heart goes out to you and your family.
Thank you both for your compassion and your help. I hope you both have a great night.
You're more than welcome. You're welcome back on this show anytime. I don't care if you want to come on next week.
I hope to come back soon with progress. I hope to come back soon sometime with an update.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Sandy, for trusting us with your story. And let's hope we can bring justice. Please, guys, anybody watching this, went a little bit long. We may split this in half, but please sign that petition. If anybody knows in politics in Florida, DeSantis or his inner circle, you know, tell them to look at this case, get it moved to another county, bring it to a grand jury. Amira Fox is not doing her job. She wants to vote of the NRA, yet NRA members, for the most part, seem not even to believe that this to be a true stand your ground case. It's first-degree premeditated murder. And we ask for this man to be held accountable. Thank you again, everybody, for coming on. Thank you for rejoining us, Samantha. We know everything. You have a lot on your plate, you know, with the coronation and everything coming up in England. So we ask you, you know, thank you. We're so grateful if you could join us in the capacity as I consider you an expert co-host and, you know, in a true crime and victim advocacy. So thank you so much. And for both of you guys for taking a chance with me to help tell your story, considering my background. I'm trying to, you know, turn my life around and help people. Thank you again for coming on. Wish everybody a good night.
Thanks for having me.
God bless.
Thank you.
God bless, Sandy.
All right.